Saint Honore Cake, also known as Gâteau Saint Honore in France. Now this cake is named after the patron saint of bakers and pastry chefs. Now this cake was invented all the way back in 1847 by the pastry chef Auguste Julien, and he worked at the time at the Chibouste bakery on Rue de Saint Honore in Paris. So this cake comprises of many complementary flavors and textures. We start off with a flaky puff pastry base. We have some choux buns which have been dipped in a crunchy caramel filled with a vanilla pastry cream and topped with whipped cream. This dessert is absolutely delicious and looks like a piece of art. So let's get into making this cake. Now I've gone ahead and prepared my rough puff pastry, and that's all ready to go. It's been resting in the fridge. If you can rest it overnight, it's even better. The longer resting times between our turns means that we're going to have less shrinking when we bake our puff pastry. So you want to grab yourself a large tray. I've got a half sheet pan here. If this size does not fit in your oven, you just want to grab yourself like the largest flat tray that you can that fits in your oven. We're going to start rolling out our pastry. So the first stage is we're going to roll it out the same size as our tray, or 30 by 40 centimeters. So just make sure that you have your bench nicely floured. And I've already had my puff pastry sitting out for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, just to soften up slightly before we start rolling it out. And we just want to be gentle with our puff pastry. If you find there's any resistance, just put it back into the refrigerator for about 30 minutes and then come back and continue rolling. If you're working on a very hot day and you feel that your margarine from your puff pastry is starting to melt, again, just pop it back into the fridge for about 20 minutes and then continue the rolling process again. And we're always checking that our pastry is not sticking. You can always add as needed, a little bit of flour. We want to try and keep our dough as even as possible all the way around. So that's about the same size as my tray, maybe a little bit bigger, which is not bad because I do find it will shrink slightly. And we just want to wrap it up onto our rolling pin and roll it out onto our tray. See, it's already shrunk a little bit. All right, so it's fitting in my tray nicely now. Now we're going to put this into the refrigerator for at least an hour. If you can put it in there for 1 to 2 hours just to completely relax. And I'm just going to put another tray on top just so it doesn't dry out, or you can just put some cling wrap over the top. And then we'll come back after this is rested. So I've had my rough puff pastry just resting in the fridge for about 2 hours. 1 to 2 hours is fine. Now I'm going to take a second tray that is the same size, and I'm going to flip this out over onto here. And I'm also using an air mat, and you don't have to use this, but I do find that it gives a lot more even baking and you get a nice crunchy puff pastry all the way through. So I'm just going to pop that down first onto my puff pastry and then the baking paper. My tray, flip that over. And you'll notice that I'm baking on the outside of my tray. So see, I have it upside down. So we have the tray, the baking paper, and the air mat. Okay. Keep this baking paper because you'll need it halfway through the baking. So I'm just going to pop that aside for now. Now we're going to go in with a fork and we're going to do lots of little fork marks. So this is going to help get nice even baking on your pastry. We get all of that air circulated. You can also find like pastry rollers that do the same thing. So we're going to put this into our oven now, and we're just going to keep aside that other sheet of baking paper and our tray because we're going to need this halfway through our baking. What we're looking for is basically the pastry is cooked, but it's still pale. It's developed some colorization, but it's more of like a pale honey color. So this is the stage before we are basically caramelizing the pastry. So I'm going to open my oven door now. And we're going to pop on that baking paper. I find at this stage you don't really need to use another air mat. This is fine. And then we're going to take our baking tray, put that over the top, and we're just going to press down because we want it to be, we want to actually just like press it down a bit. Okay, so we're going to get that back on and cook for an additional 15 minutes. And then we're going to have a look at the pastry. Essentially, we do want a really nice deep golden color. We are looking for those kind of bitter flavors throughout the pastry, and that's very signature to a lot of French pastries. You'll find their puff pastries are a lot darker and almost have like a caramel sort of flavor to them. So yep, we'll leave that for another 15 minutes and then pop back and check. So I took my puff pastry out of the oven. We did the 30 minutes, however I did extend as well. So I checked my oven to have a look at it. It was still a bit too pale, so we extended it for another 15 to 20 minutes until we have this beautiful deep golden color, and that's exactly what we're looking for. You'll see that the pastry has also shrunk a little bit, but that's completely fine because we are going to be cutting this once it cools down into the shapes that we want. So our puff pastry has been cooling. I'm just going to take it off our tray, and I have myself here a cutting board. And we can see that lovely colorization. It's beautiful and deep golden. Now we're going to start cutting into the sizes that we need for our Saint Honore cake. So those being 16 by 16 centimeters for the large one, and for the small ones are 8 by 8 centimeters. So I find the best way to do it is we are going to cut a nice straight line. And I'm using a serrated knife or a cake knife. And now we're going to go 16 centimeters. And then we're just going to transfer those onto our baking sheet. So now at this stage, we are going to be putting on some of our crunchy caramel dust. So essentially, this is the same caramel that we use to dip our choux buns in. And I just ground it in my blender or food processor until it was nice and fine. And you just want to store this in a jar. And now what we're going to do is just dust over some of our crunchy caramel dust. So we're kind of doing like a nice fine coating so we can't see our pastry through. And what this is going to do is keep our puff pastry really nice and crunchy even after we've put the cream on. And of course give a lovely caramel flavor to our dessert as well. So you want to immediately, if you do have any of that dust left, to put it back into your jar. It is very hygroscopic, so it's going to attach itself to moisture very quickly. So just make sure that you pop it back in your jar and you can reuse that for your pastries. Now I'm going to pop this into my oven. You want to just keep an eye on it. I would check it every 2 to 3 minutes. Essentially, we're just melting that caramel, and as soon as it's melted, we can take that out and allow it to cool. So I've already prepared my little vegan choux buns. And I actually made these a few days ago and I've had them in my freezer. So this is a great way to prepare things ahead of time, and then we can just refresh them on the day that we are assembling our pastry. So I'm just going to pop these out onto a tray. Any kind of tray is fine. And we're going to put these in a preheated oven. I've got it preheated at 150 degrees Celsius. I'm going to pop those in there for about 5 to 7 minutes. And these are going to come up just like they were as soon as we baked them, nice and fresh and ready to use. So into the oven for about 5 to 7 minutes. We have our choux buns here. Okay, so just using one of these sharp piping tips, we're going to make a hole in the bottom. You can also use a knife, or you can use one of these cones as well to make a hole in the bottom. So anything that just pierce a hole so we can put our cream inside. So to make the small saint honor, you need 5 little choux buns. And we need 13 for the big ones. And you just want to fill it with your vanilla pastry cream. So I'm going to pop these guys into the fridge just to firm up for about 20 minutes. Now we want to go ahead and make our crunchy caramel for our choux buns. So I've got my glucose syrup, sugar and water all together in my pot here. And we are going to slowly start melting that sugar and glucose syrup over a medium-high heat. And then bring this caramel up to 185 degrees Celsius. So once that sugar's melted, we're going to put our probe thermometer in and keep an eye on it. You'll see it's just starting to change colour around the 170 degrees Celsius mark. And we're going to cook this until 185. Just give it a good stir just to make sure you're getting the correct reading. And as soon as you get the 185 reading, you want to take it off the heat. It is going to continue to brown when you take it off the heat. And we want to cool this down to 160 degrees Celsius. And what that's going to do is thicken up our caramel so it's at the right consistency to dip our choux buns. So while this is cooling down, I'm going to grab my filled choux buns out of the fridge. Okay, so our caramel is cooling down nicely. You always want to be very careful when working with caramel. It's very, very, very hot. So So now that it's at our working temperature, we can take out that. So I have a silicone form here. It's a half sphere with 40 millimeters in its width. And this is going to give us a very professional look to our caramelized shoe buns. Now, if you don't have one of these or you don't want to invest in one, that's completely fine. After we dip our shoe buns, you can just put them directly onto your paper, like so, and then you get like a little bit of a flat bottom, which is completely fine, either on a silicone mat or on a clean baking paper. All right, so let's get dipping these. So you do want to be very careful. I actually like to use a fork just to make sure that I'm not going to burn myself. And we're going to dip into our caramel, get a nice coating, just swirl it around a little bit, and then into our form. And press that down, and then we're going to continue on. So we can go back to our first one and have a check, see if it's set. Yep, it has, and we've got a nice crisp shell, and we can see that it's beautiful and round. So that is perfect. We can set that aside. So while these are firming up, we can start preparing our whipped cream topping. So now I have all my elements to start assembling our Saint Honore cakes. We can get started. So I'm going to do the small ones first. So I might spin this around. And the first thing that we're going to start with is our pastry cream. Now we need quite a decent amount of our pastry cream. I have it in a piping bag fitted with about a 10 to 12 millimeter round piping nozzle, or you can just cut the bag. So we're going to start in the center. We want a decent mound of our pastry cream. Okay. And now here, this is optional. I have some classic caramel sauce, and I've just popped that into a piping bag. I'm just going to snip the top off. And we're going to pipe some of our caramel sauce inside our pastry cream. So we have a nice little surprise in there. Now we're going to go in with our shoe buns. So try and pick 4 that are like relatively the same size. And I've got them on the flat edges like so. So once they are attached, we can work on our large one. So we're going to spin this around again. Now with our pastry cream here, we want to make a nice area of pastry cream inside our square. And the same thing with our caramel sauce. We can go in and pipe a bit of caramel sauce in there. And now for our shoe buns. So now I'm going to prepare my whipped cream topping. Now I haven't put my whipped cream and the cream cheese together just yet, because I do find as soon as you start to combine them, it will start to set. So you really do want to prepare it just before you're about to pipe it onto your dessert. And I have a piping bag here fitted with a piping tip, which gives a beautiful sort of leaf shape to our cream. You don't have to use this tip, but I do find it's very classic to this style of dessert for our Saint Honore cake. You can also use the fluted French tip as well. All right, so we're going to start combining our cream together. So we're just going to put our whipped cream a little at a time into our cream cheese. The first amount just to kind of loosen it up, and then we'll just fold through the rest. Now I carefully want to start piping onto my smaller ones. So as always, we want to make sure that we have good pressure. Make sure everything is connected. And just go very slowly and carefully. So I'm just adding pressure and then pulling away. Turn, adding pressure and pulling away. So I have here some vanilla powder. Now this is completely optional, but I think it gives it a really fancy finish. And I'm just going to put in a tea strainer, or you can just use a small sifter, like a small sieve. And I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit on the top and then finish off with another choux bun. So we're going to carefully transfer that back onto our tray. That puff pastry is very delicate, so just be careful. So I'd recommend that you transfer your cakes into the fridge for about 20 to 30 minutes just to firm up a little bit before you take your photos, and enjoy.